Shelton City Council meeting to order for May 7, 2019. Rise for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. No. Councilmember McDowell's out of town on city business. So Donna, when you get a chance, will you call the roll, please?
I will. Councilmember Dorsey.
Here.
Councilmember Inesco.
Here.
Councilmember Krantz.
Here.
Mayor Rogers.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Peterson.
Here.
Councilmember Schmidt.
Here.
Okay. And we all agree to excuse Councilmember McDowell this evening, okay?
Yes.
Any changes to the published agenda tonight? Hearing none, we will proceed. We'll start off with our normal council reports. I'll start with Councilmember Dorsey.
All right. Since our last council meeting, we've had a communications meeting on the 24th, a budget retreat on the 26th, and a study session on the 30th. Then we had Spotlight Shelton, which was a fun night, on the 1st. And then council briefing on every Thursday, or every other Thursday with Jeff. That's all.
Okay. Councilmember Nisco.
Yes, besides our council meetings, briefings, and study sessions, I attended a Housing Behavioral Health Board meeting. I attended the communication meeting. Part budget retreat, I had some other business to take care of. I attended a ribbon cutting at Polly's Place, and that is it.
Councilmember Krantz.
All right, well, going to many of those same type of community activities and staff briefings. I do have a criminal justice board meeting next week.
Okay, thank you. I won't go over some of our standard stuff from the last 2 weeks, as our council members have mentioned. I will highlight Spotlight Shelton. I want to commend staff for doing a great job on that. We encourage our citizens. I think we'll have another one in 6 months, probably on a different topic. We went over code enforcement, and I encourage our citizens to come out whenever that will be, 6 months from now. Upcoming, I have a rescheduled Crossroads meeting Monday, I believe. We're having a lodging tax, kind of an open forum with our participants on Tuesday, and then attending a couple chamber events next week.
Okay. In addition, it's already been mentioned, tomorrow is the opiate stakeholders meeting out at Alderbrook in the morning, and Peninsula Regional Transportation Planning Organization is meeting rather frequently right now to work on an interlocal agreement update as to the administrator for that project, and we'll be seeing that coming up at our next business meeting.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councilmember Schmidt.
Good evening. The only thing on my calendar this coming week is an EDC, Economic Development Council Board meeting this Thursday at 7:45 PUD 3. And that is all.
Okay. I'll turn it over to City Manager Knighton. He's going to talk about forming a budget committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of the public. We are starting to formulate our 2020 budget for next calendar year and for consideration by the council later this year. And as part of that initial development of the 2020 budget, I would like to ask for 2 or 3, depending on council preference, members of council to help us on that committee develop the budget priorities for 2020. Those members of city council that are not part of the executive budget team is basically what it is, will be kept fully informed through councilor reports at council meetings and through our briefings, our biweekly briefings with me.
Okay.
And we have nominations or acceptance and appointment by the mayor. It'd be great.
Okay. So expression of interest. I know at our budget retreat, Councilmember Schmidt expressed interest. Others? Okay, here.
Anybody else want to do it?
Hearing that, I will appoint 3 members if she's willing. That'd be Deputy Mayor Peterson, Councilmember Schmidt, and myself. And I would also like to ask if Deputy Mayor would be chairman of that committee.
I will do so.
Okay, thank you very much. Are we in agreement on that? All right,
That's fine.
thanks, everyone. Okay. Okay, next we have our open public comment. This is for things that are not on the agenda for specific action or review. We ask people for 3-minute limit, and when you come up, please state whether you're a Shelton, your name and whether you're a Shelton resident or not. And if you haven't signed in a card, there's a comment card to give to Donna so she can call you up. So, Donna?
We have Mary Ellen Hogan.
Please, Mary.
Thank you. I'm Mary Ellen Hogan, and I live on Puget Street. Are you all aware of Puget Street? You know where it's at, and you know it's dusty and dirty, and it's been on the 6-year plan since 1968, and it's still dusty and dirty. And I'm just wondering, is there any time that's scheduled to have it paved?
Yeah, you can talk to our Public Works Director, and we're working on a plan right now, long-term plan, so. After the meeting, if you want to talk to Craig, that would be a great discussion. Is that okay, Craig? Yeah.
We have had a discussion, we have talked
Yes.
already. But yes, feel free to have another conversation, yes.
So, when, can I talk to you and find out? Can I
Well,
just call you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
okay. And another thing, is there some way that you can rearrange that payment box out front? It's very difficult to get the mail into it. I have to open the door, I'm short. I have to open the door, drive past it, open the door, unbuckle, it's not convenient.
Okay.
Think of it.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Okay.
That's it for now.
That's it? Okay. So we'll move on to our consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as published?
I move to approve the consent agenda as published.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as published. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we're going to have a presentation from Public Works Director Craig Gregory on the biosolids.
Very short presentation, just per the council wanting to bring back on a quarterly basis revenue for biosolids. The biosolids revenue for this first quarter of 2019, so far $72,260.98, up about 100% from last year. So just looking at that revenue coming in, just an update for you on that, and I would be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have, if you do have any.
Was that 100% for the first quarter of last year?
Just for the
versus
first quarter.
The first quarter of this year?
Correct.
Any unanticipated drain on resources or equipment?
We're starting to get to a point where we've got a couple of more potential users or customers that have approached us about bringing significant amounts of biosolids to us for further processing. And we're getting up to a point where we may have to run more than the shift that we have been running so far. And that's been about a 5-10 shift through the biosolids dryer that's done by a maintenance worker. So we've had to have 2 staff members. We've got 1 staff member that's on 410s now, and then an additional staff member that just comes in on the Fridays to run. Would be the only thing. So looking at another shift, we would likely have to go to some sort of additional shift outside of the normal workday if we continue to bring on more users.
Okay. Any other questions for Craig? Right? Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay. Next, we're on to our business agenda. So anybody signed up for public comment on any of our
No.
business? Okay, thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
Our first item is Parks and Recreation Director, or excuse me, Community Development Director Mark Gregory has information for us about appointment to Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Mayor. The good old days, Parks and Recreation. I'm bringing to you tonight a recommendation for appointment to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee of Christopher Wright. Mr. Wright submitted a letter of interest for appointment on the advisory committee, and we have one opening left, which would round out the number of appointments to 5 here just recently, and we have our first meeting scheduled for May 14th. So that's coming up fairly quickly. With council's concurrence, I would request that we waive the 3-touch rule so we can get Mr. Wright appointed. So he's official for the 14th, if you do concur.
Okay. Any questions for Mark? I have one. Mr. Wright is not a Shelton resident, which is great.
Correct.
But we're supposed to have 3 on the committee, that's at least 3, correct?
Correct.
And that, we're
Correct,
good with that?
exactly right.
Okay, right, great. Okay. So everyone okay with
Yeah.
bypassing the 3-touch rule? All right.
Yeah.
Do we have a motion?
I move to appoint Mr. Chris Wright to the City of Shelton Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee.
Second. Okay. We have a motion and a second to appoint Chris Wright to the City of Shelton Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, next, back to Director Ziegler for information about the Civic Center Rotating Art Gallery.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. I'm bringing to you today the next recommendation from the Shelton Arts Commission for installment in the Civic Center Rotating Art Gallery. The city called for artists with a deadline of April 19th, it looks like. 6 artists submitted their work. I believe you have copies of the work that would be installed. And with your approval, I am again asking for waiver of the 3-touch rule so we can get the art in place for their next 3-month rotation beginning June 4th up through August 30th.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Again, consensus to waive the 3-touch rule. All right. Any questions for Mark? Do we have a motion?
I move to approve the Shelton Arts Commission's recommendations for placement in the Civic Center Rotating Art Gallery.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second to approve the Shelton Arts Commission recommendations for placement in the Civic Center Rotating Art Gallery. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, back to Mark about library repairs
Thank
for the
you once
William G.
again.
Reed Library.
Yes. As you know, the City of Shelton received a direct appropriation through the State Department of Commerce for repairs at the William G. Reed Library. We've worked through the design process and recently opened bids last Thursday for this project. We received 2 bids. They are responsible bidders, and we're working through the last details of this project. It looks like we may not get all the alternates done, but we certainly can get the roof and the siding repairs and painting completed within the project, and we're still working on some details to see what level of work will be done on the deck itself, but we anticipate at least the railings will be repaired and that stuff. And those particular projects, or that part of the project, the membrane surface is questionable this piece until we really run everything to ground. So we're working through the bid process, and we'll bring you a recommendation on the 21st for approval of a contract with the lowest responsible bidder.
Okay. Questions for Mark? Do you know about how much we've spent so far on the project?
Yeah, it's close to $20,000 in advertisement, design, review, discovery. I don't have the exact amount, but it's
Okay.
right, yeah, right there.
Okay, thanks. All right, consensus to move this forward to our action agenda for the 21st, all right? Okay, next, we're on to our action agenda. Has anybody signed up
Yes, there is.
for which item?
On the last item, G6, C
Okay.
Street.
Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
Okay, our first action item is Court Administrator Diane Smolinski is here to talk to us about an interlocal agreement with the Mason County for jail services.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. Diane Smolinski, Municipal Court. I last presented on April 16th the interlocal agreement with Mason County for use of jail services. Tonight it's on the action agenda. We move to accept the interlocal agreement with Mason County for use of jail services by authorizing the city manager to sign the ILA as presented.
Do we have a motion? We discussed this last week for last meeting?
Yes. We move
Are you
to,
asking for a motion?
Motion.
Oh, okay.
we move to accept the interlocal agreement with Mason County for use of jail services by authorizing the city manager to sign the ILA as presented.
Second.
Okay. A motion and a second. Do we have any further discussions or questions for Diane?
I would just like to highlight the budget fiscal information for the folks that are here and paying attention to this issue as we've moved through it. That our 7 guaranteed beds at the Mason County Jail remain at $21,717.50, or $260,000 plus annually. So there's a significant cost that the city is outlaying for this service, and I do understand that this was not a fun process as well, and I appreciate you guys bearing through that and hoping for better times ahead. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Agreed.
All right. So we have a motion and a second to accept the interlocal agreement with Mason County for use of jail services by authorizing the city manager to sign the ILA as presented. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane. Okay, next, Public Works Craig Gregory, sorry about that, is going to brief us on the purchase of a Vector truck.
Thanks, Mayor and council members. We gave you a pretty extensive presentation a couple of weeks ago on the Vector truck. I don't know that there was anything that we heard that you wanted answers to, so would like to answer any questions if you do have any for the Vector truck purchase. One just notable thing, definitely under the 2019 budgeted amount of $525, we are looking at the low bidder or the most responsive bidder being at $513,325.
Okay. Start with the motion. Do we have a motion?
I move to approve the purchase of the vacuum excavating jet truck by authorizing the council to sign the vendor award form and the mayor to sign the purchase order for Owen Equipment.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any further discussion? I'll just add one comment. It's mainly for city manager Knight, and I think in the future, my expectation during budgeting will be a little bit higher for justification of this large purchase to put in the budget. So that's all I'll add to this. I'm appreciative of you answering my questions and having the open discussion. So that's my only request, at least for me. So, okay. We have a motion and a second to approve the purchase of a vacuum excavating jet truck by authorizing the council to sign the vendor award form and authorizing me to sign the purchase order for Owen Equipment. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, next action item is back to Director Gregory about the road rating program.
So again, we presented this a couple of weeks ago. We did hear a few questions back from the council. Tim's going to put up a couple of slides for us. One thing that was asked of Public Works was to bring back what were the functional routes that were eligible for Transportation Improvement Board grants or other funding. In front of you or on the screen, you will see Shelton has quite a few of these, very extensive grid system of grant-eligible roads within that. So if you have any questions about this map or eligibility for grant funding, I would certainly be open to answering any of those. But you can see the roads that are on here that are arterials or collectors. No residential roads, all arterial or collector roads that are eligible for grant funding.
My question with the state highway, that qualifies as a principal arterial and not a state highway through the city limits?
It's eligible for grant funding.
It's eligible for TIP
it's-
grant.
It's a functionally classified route. Now,
Duplication of grant benefits from other agencies, is there an issue with that? So if the city were to go for TIP grants, but the state already had investments from outside grant sources, be it federal highways or others, do we hit a wall there? Do you know?
I don't believe we would, but I am not certain on that.
I don't mean to throw that out there, I just saw that on the list and
Yeah.
I just don't, there's maybe an interpretation from citizens that the city would be going out for repavement of Highway 3 through the city limits, and I wanted to make sure that that would be clearly not the case.
Right, the state would be
State
responsible for that.
And my other comment, sorry if I can take two here. Go ahead. My other comment is that's a great visual aid. If we could publish that and communicate to the public out on, through our electronic channels, that would be excellent.
What we've started to do, beginning last meeting and will continue doing, is any presentation materials that the council sees and the public sees at these meetings will be published as part of the agenda when the video goes up on our website. So all information will be available to
Great.
the public as well.
Thanks.
so just one other small tidbit or caveat to this is these roads that are functionally classified technically are eligible for grant funding. There are some of these roads that we have had the TIB engineers out to look at that they just said, we don't know how that actually got functionally classified, and it, for all intents and purposes, wouldn't actually be grant eligible, just because it's not really a road that connects the system. A few of those to point out would be Fogarty up in the Capitol Hill area. It's a gravel road that they looked at and told us never to apply for a road like that. Another one, Dickinson and Puget were two of the other roads that are on this map that they just looked at and said that would be better funded through local funds, not necessarily something that they would fund anytime in the future. So just noting on here, some of those roads that look like they may be grant eligible, those are the ones that really jump out at me, that they identified that probably would be better done with local funds.
This doesn't affect our commitment for 20 residential blocks a year, does it?
In,
It's using this for match dollars and not having money to do our 20 blocks a year.
that's a funding strategy that would be a council decision.
Yeah.
And that is certainly something that we can talk about, but that would certainly be a funding strategy one way or the other. Right now, the former commission had set that, the dollar thresholds for where that money is going, at least the TBD funds, Transportation Benefit District funds. And a couple of years ago, the commission set that at 65% to capital projects as match funding, 30% to residential maintenance of streets, and 5% to sidewalks and ADA ramps, which if you look at that these days, I'm not sure that those necessarily work. When you look at what would be 5%, about $25,000 annually to sidewalks and ADA ramps, that doesn't get you very far. You want to take a real chunk out of that, but that's certainly a discussion that I think we need to have moving forward of do those percentages still work, and are we still on the right track here to actually move forward and get some of these roadways that need some attention, and our walkability of Shelton through sidewalks and ADA ramps, are those percentages still working for us? So something that we certainly need to take a look at. The other,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Mayor.
No, go ahead.
I was going to move to the next slide, so you have a question.
I'm just wondering, I mean, we're going to talk about Access Shelton later on a couple of the projects. I believe in that plan, we had 200,000 for maintenance annually, plus 200,000 for the 20 blocks. So in theory, 400,000 for maintenance / residential paving. How does, we're talking about huge numbers, significantly over that by year and here. So how does this affect what we've already been presented with prior to this in Access Shelton?
That's again, a funding strategy that needs to be looked at by the council. That needs to be something that we look at, and whether we've been fairly successful with grant funding so far. If you remember back to the Downtown Connector project, we had about $1 million match that was coming from city funds originally for that project. Out of the $4 million, about $1 million of it was coming from the city. Right at the last minute, we did get some legislative money to fill that gap, and really didn't have anything out of pocket for that of city funds to fund that project. So our fund balance right now is fairly healthy. So where we want to go with what is in that fund balance right now for transportation and what is actually coming in over the years to come, that needs to be a conversation that we continue to have and make a funding strategy that works for, I think, all aspects of transportation. So the other big one that was asked for was somewhat of a report card of kind of where we're at. And as you can see on this list, you've got the 11 different districts or zones that are out there, and you can see from a PCI level, if you look at the number of road sections that are within those zones, those are basically, for all intents and purposes, about a block. There are some of them that extend further, like on Wallace Nealon, that you just didn't have an intersecting street that would be much longer than a block. So like the section between Olympic Highway North at the stoplight there down to what would be Burger King and the Chevron station. That's from stoplight to stoplight. It's a road section, but it's much larger than a block. So you do have a few of those cases, but for, like I said, all intents and purposes, if you look at those road sections, those are basically a block defined as a road section. So you can see where we're at in each one of those zones, and then the associated cost with that in 2019. And one thing to just keep in mind, that number that you see down at the bottom is not an all-encompassing number. We're not saying that 5.7 million is going to fix every street and bring it up to a 90 PCI. In the future, you'll see in the next few slides, we're going to look at a 10-year and then a 20-year forecast. This is really a 3-year look at, there are certain roads that wouldn't be slated to be done. If we had unlimited funds and said, let's go in and do the roads that we need to get done, in 2019, it would be about $6 million. That defers some of the roadways that are teetering, that would be better. A road that's at like a PCI of 70, which is right on the split of either needing a chip seal or an overlay. A chip seal probably isn't going to do a 70 PCI road a lot of good. It would be much better to defer that a year or two and then just do an overlay on that roadway. So you'll see some of those roadways that really got deferred into year 2020 and 2021 in the 3-year forecast. But this does give you a pretty decent report card that you can kind of see where we're at and where the worst really zones or districts are throughout the city. And then at the very right-hand column, you can see how many gravel roads we have left within the city of Shelton also. But quite a few of those, you'll see fall down in those lower ranges of under a 25 and under 50 is a pretty decent majority of our roadways out there.
May I ask, there's probably a reason for this, but why do we use sections rather than road miles or number of yards or some other measurement that's more finite? And the reason that I ask that is I know that if we're gonna go out and chip seal, they're gonna base it on the road length, not necessarily how many blocks. And so trying to compare apples to apples, I'm just curious how that fits in when we use road sections instead of a linear determination. Does that make sense?
So when you do go to bid, we do use things like the bid we have out right now for chip seal, we use square yardage.
Right.
We take the road sections that need to be done. It's really just, it's for our staff to go out and be able to rate these roads and not take a very large section, because a roadway can change quite a bit through what would be a road section. So if you just said you were gonna take Wallace Nealon, there's a big difference between Wallace Nealon, between Olympic Highway North and, let's say, Spring Road, and then further out, you know, the heavier use. And also, a good example is Olympic Highway North. There's a pretty decent change from C Street to K Street. Once you get past K Street, the roadway's in much better condition than it would be south of K Street. So that's why we use those road sections instead of an entire roadway.
Sure, and that absolutely makes sense. I guess what I'm asking is, do we know if we were to convert this, we're saying 59 road sections in West Hillcrest have a PCI of 91 plus. Do we know how much of the roadway that is? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes,
How that relates
it breaks
to?
it down within Street Saver
Okay.
and the program. All of those,
Perfect.
you remember seeing that WashDOT form that we had? It gives the length and width of the road section. All of that is plugged in. You could go to that road section, plug it in, and road section number 80, you could pull up and it would give you the amount, the square yardage. That's where we came up with these costs also.
Perfect.
But yes, very easily through, it's a lot like an Excel spreadsheet. You click on that road section, it gives you the length and width, PCI, and then actual costs to either maintain or fix. So we have all of that information. I just didn't want to,
No,
I didn't
I
want to
appreciate that.
get into that and have this document be too large. But yes, we have all of that information, and that's what drives the PCI, is that total number of square yardage, and then the amount of, or percent of cracking, whether it be a transverse crack, alligator cracking, or whatever it might be.
Sure. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So I guess from looking at this, these sections of road are all ones that are not necessarily, they're not items we can get grant funding to do. These ones right here.
These include all of the roadways, so that was one thing that I heard from the council last meeting, was you would like to see total numbers for everything, whether it was grant funded or grant eligible or not. This is every roadway, whether it be an arterial all the way down to a residential street. So residential streets, not much, if any, grant funding that I'm aware of that would fund a residential street. So this does include every street that we have in Shelton, whether it be grant eligible or not.
Okay, so my question would be that if we wanted to do a realistic maintenance program, what we need to do is take a look at, okay, we don't have $6 million for this. Do we?
It's a much larger number than that,
Yeah.
once we get out into the,
We don't have $6 million in the budget to do this total for 2019.
correct.
do we?
That's correct.
We don't have that.
We do not have that.
But so it'd be a conversation for this council to say, okay, we can't do it all, and that's not all. But where can we start budgeting, where can we start taking a look, and actually making a stab at starting down that road, no pun intended, on how much can we afford to project towards starting to maintain the old roads and the new roads on this, you see, because this has never been even slightly possible in the past few years. I mean, there's been no money to really maintain these. But I think we need to take a proactive approach and take a look at, okay, if we can't do it all, but let's say, what can we do 30 or 40 or 50%? And we need to start putting a program in action that's going to protect these streets. So, I don't know where we are on how much money or whatnot, but I do know that if we were doing all the streets and sidewalks in the city of Shelton or whatever, it'd be like $50 or $60 million. I mean, if we were doing all the streets. So, I don't know where we are, but we probably would want to say for, next year's budget with the budget conversations you're gonna be having, what do we want to put at really stabbing towards maintenance of these roads? I mean, because without any money given to you, or, I think we need to realistically look at, okay, how much money, we have to budget something for this. And, I think we need to possibly figure out how much we're going to do.
That is exactly the conversation that we need to have, and that is really the reason that we started to put this together, so we had a realistic look at what the actual needs are. I think we've guessed. As long as I've been here, we've been guessing at this of how much is it actually going to cost, how bad are our roadways, or how good are they? What is the report card? And I think we have a pretty decent view of that now, and we can start to look at how we fund this, or how we start to maintain and also fix some of that infrastructure that is falling underneath that 50 pavement condition rating, which we need to take a look at, and also addressing our gravel streets that we've still got quite a few out there.
Craig, I want to clarify something.
Yes.
The council sheet says direction for 2019. What I heard Councilmember Krantz talk about was 2020 budgeting. Those are two completely different animals to me. So is it both?
We are going to let you make that decision for 2019. We've already got a set budget. So if there is a want or a need by the council to change that directive, it's a little late in the game for that. It's not too late. We are planning we've got a chip seal bid out now. That doesn't mean that we haven't awarded that, doesn't mean that we have to follow through with that, or doesn't mean that we can't add on to that also. But right now, in the 2019 budget, you have got $250,000 set aside for chip seal and maintenance activities, and also $200,000 set aside for residential maintenance or paving. That doesn't mean we're going out set to do a certain amount of blocks. We've got $200,000 set aside for whatever activity we or you deem necessary, whether it be paving, chip sealing in residential neighborhoods, whatever that might be. So right now, we have gone through that. The 2019 budget is set unless this council wants to change that. But then looking further into the future, certainly, and looking at budget and where we want to direct those dollars to.
Okay, thanks.
So I'm going to skip over years 2 and 3. It's a lot of the same, and really get to the numbers in the 10-year forecast. So you can see this is where we start to really get into kind of those jaw-dropping numbers that you look at that we would need to actually keep our roads above a 90 PCI. So not only new roadways and new pavement, but then once you do put that new pavement down, maintaining it once you've got it. So a road, much like a great example would be Northcliffe. That was paved several years ago, about 8 or 9 years ago, up in that area. It's starting to get to a point where it's got some cracking. You're starting to see some of that moisture get down through the mat into the subgrade, and letting that go with our wet winters and with freeze thaws and things like that. If we don't maintain that road will end up just like some of our other ones that aren't very well maintained. So looking at that, and not only forecasting what this does for the next 10 years, is looks at all of those roads that need to be either reconstructed or overlaid, and then also maintained with something like crack seal or chip seal. And then when you get out to the 20-year forecast, it gets much larger. You'll see that a lot of the rehab really goes down. You don't run into a lot of that rehab. You've already taken care of that. And a lot of it just falls under maintenance or preventive maintenance in that category once you get a little further past year 10. But that total ends up being about $38 million over that 20-year period. So you can see what it would take for us to catch up on just our roadways. This is not addressing our sidewalk or ADA needs. That's a completely different study that we will be starting shortly to take a look at what our needs are for sidewalks and pedestrians. That is all I think I heard from the council as far as what you wanted to see from the last presentation. And if you have any further questions, certainly try to answer them the best that I can.
I guess I'll ask you a question. I try not to bridge the 20 blocks, so I know that's a sensitive subject, but based on what you know now, after the road inspections, are there roads out there that we should be spending a little bit of maintenance money that we're not going to spend it on this year that would gain us a huge amount? Can you identify, where we have a really road that's been pretty good, like you described Northcliffe, where if we wait a year or even year and a half, it'd be a serious degrade, that we should be doing something this year and it's not in your maintenance plan?
We went through and took a look at all of our arterials and collectors. So basically everything outside of a residential neighborhood. Just for the simple fact that those roadways deteriorate much more quickly than it would a residential road. So we went and took a look at those and looked at everything that was a 70 and above. So 70 basically to 90, which would require a chip seal on those roadways. And right now, 2019 dollars, you're looking at about $500,000 to get those roadways done, which you could go in and for $500,000 go in and get a chip seal all of those roadways up that are in that area that would be eligible for a chip seal. That's not counting those roadways like Olympic Highway North between C Street and K Street that have fallen below that and are in real need of something more, a grind, an overlay, or what we've identified as a much larger project that would address ADA concerns and road calming and some other things. But just to do maintenance on our arterials and collectors, it'd be about $500,000 in 2019 dollars to seal all of those roadways up and get them back, into that high 80s, low 90s range.
So if we did want to approach this in the year 2019, then what we're looking at is if there's a desire of this council to do that, then we would have to figure out how we could reappropriate some money to do something like that. I mean,
Right now within the budget, like I said, you've got $450,000 set aside for transportation activities. I don't think that would be a stretch to move any of those around, depending on what this council felt was the highest and best need. But yeah, at this point for 2019, there's $450,000 budgeted for transportation activities outside of projects. That doesn't include things like matches and other things that we had set aside for 2019. Because you do have some money budgeted that we didn't end up using this year that we deferred for better planning and design of Railroad Avenue and continuing the conversation with the county on a partnership and deferring that until next spring. But we did have, I believe it was about $500,000 as match funding and completion of Railroad Avenue that likely we'll have to carry into 2020 after we get that designed and move forward with that project. But right now, you've got $450,000 budgeted for 2019.
Just a follow-up question. The $250K that is in the budget, I assume that's part of it, has to be part of the 500 total, right? If we did all the streets,
Correct.
part of that is the 250 you've already got, the worst is probably in that 250 you've already got planned.
Out of transportation funds, you would need about another 50,000 to do all of the arterials and collectors, if that's the direction we shifted all of that money into one pot. It's not on top of the 250,000.
Right, but I mean, the 250 includes probably the worst streets in that 500,000.
Correct,
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
that's
assumed that
correct.
was the case. I just wanted to ask.
Roads that are deteriorating at a higher rate, Wallace Nealon, between Olympic Highway North and Shelton Springs Road was a road that was identified. Shelton Springs Road between 13th and the city limits, 13th Street, were the ones that right now are out to bid. We also identified North Cliff Road that was in need of some sort of maintenance activities. We decided to pull that off of the chip seal. We may go in and try to crack seal that for right now because we just didn't have the funds available to get that done at this point. So yeah, that did identify what we thought as staff were the worst and most in need, that would be the most expensive if we left for another year or two, especially with the traffic volumes and the heavy loads that we've got on Wallace Nealon. If we don't get something on it now, we're probably looking at some kind of mill and fill, some kind of overlay in the future.
Okay, that's great. Councilmember Schmidt.
What is, during the last discussion on this, you also sort of projected a situation where a surface treatment such as a chip seal would prolong the life out. Some of those were 15, 20 or more years in some cases. So, wrangling that with the stuff that's the roads, the residential neighborhood streets, the low traffic volume roads, wrangling that alongside the lack of potential grant funding. I almost, to be blunt about it, I don't see how we could have any capital project without first doing some sort of maintenance, strategic maintenance to those roads in residential neighborhoods. To just let it deteriorate to the point where now it's a $250,000 block of ADA ramps and grinding and inlay and all, whatever, permanent fix. Like, why aren't we just looking at like more of a blanket first touch residential neighborhoods with a chip seal or some sort of surface treatment prior to going out and making it a capital project? I mean, to me, that would make a little bit more sense and focus those dollars on this more strategic corridors where we're gonna get a bigger bang for our buck anyways. I don't know.
And this certainly is something that I've been grappling with for quite some time. And we did come up with some sort of a concept of how staff would move forward and not wanting to have a recommendation, but we looked at that in-fund balance that is fairly significant right now. It's in the neighborhood of about $1.5 million that we have. And that certainly could be set aside for future match capital projects and then continue to take a real bite out of some of these areas or zones with the full TBD funds. If we wanted to look at like a 5-year plan, you could take a pretty good chunk out of these roadways if you take out. So if you look at these totals, if you take out the roadways that are eligible for grants, that could be projects that we've identified in Access Shelton that are very, very likely to be funded over the next 5 or 6 years, if you take those out of this forecast, and also you take out some of the things that are going to be doing, this also includes North Downtown Shelton that looks like it's going to be paved. We've okayed a Schedule C on Basin 3 that will pave most of downtown Shelton, North Downtown Shelton. So those numbers are still in here. We have not taken any of those out. We wanted to give you a real look at right now, not projecting forward of what's going to be done. Also, the Northcliffe neighborhood is still in here. It just got repaved a week ago. Northcliffe Hill is still on here. So there's some projects that are still on this 3-year plan that you certainly would take off, and you can kind of look at, if we go back to, if Tim can put that back up for us. If we go back to the 3-year plan and look at those zones, and you can kind of look at where they're at. But if you look at some of those worst ones that are in there, and it's really the Mountain View areas, those include things like Olympic Highway North. So you can kind of look at what you would think would cost to kind of rebuild some of those roadways and take those out, and you're kind of left with what you would look at for residential neighborhoods. And you can really see how you could take a pretty good chunk out if you took about $500,000 just for those. You can see how when you get into some of those zones that you've got in 2019, right now, if you had about $500,000, you could really check off the 4 lowest ones that you've got there. And then looking into the future over the next couple of years, if you looked at a 5-year forecast or funding strategy to take care of those, you could really, really do some damage with those and really take a good bite out of those if you had some designated funds of around $500,000 to really put to those, and kept that reserve fund that you've got now as match money to leverage, on those larger projects. So
Program that out, once
Yes.
you've done the strategic maintenance and you say that, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No,
but once you've done
absolutely.
that strategic maintenance and you deem that this chip seal should last another 10 years, let's say, so that means you have 10 years to bank the money for that capital improvement for a full-on repave, whatever that may be,
Yes.
right? Program that out, prioritize that. I don't see why we wouldn't be upping the TBD cut for strategic maintenance like this. It seems like a no-brainer to me, so.
And we can certainly prep this for a discussion for council under another business item at a future meeting, a relatively
Yeah.
soon one,
Yeah,
and prep this as a separate item.
I think we
But-
should.
Councilmember Schmidt is really right in line with what I was thinking as far as moving forward and taking a look at maybe a change to the way we're doing things now or that percentage, because we really need to look at maybe taking that full TBD funds and putting it towards getting a chunk out of some of those worst roads, and maybe we continue to take the REAP funds and the TIF funds, the Transportation Improvement Funds, and maybe leave those aside to continue to do some match funding, with our capital projects, and take that full TBD funds and really put it into a pot and say, every year, we're gonna spend $500,000 and try to really whittle this down. And I think it's really the only way that you can really get a handle on this. At $200,000 a year, by the time you go out and pave a couple of roads each year, you would end up having to go back and try to maintain those, or the cycle is just going to continue. So I think you hit it right on the head.
And I think that's what the people wanted when they voted for the TBD.
And we're grossing right now, what, about $40,000 a month in TBD funds, about that. And I mean, so we're putting a decent chunk of money away every year. And that seems to be a pretty viable funding source. It seems to be doing well. So, invest in it strategically and do the right thing. I think it's a good thing for us to tackle here, so.
Yeah, and we, like I said, we will prep a specific agenda item for this topic, probably at your June 4th meeting. So you can expect that, and
I think we should.
we'll brief all the options beforehand as well.
Councilmember Nisco?
The ending fund balance of the $1.5 million, is that minus the 400,000 we have for 2019, or is that after the 400,000?
That's after.
And then how much of that is committed to the roundabouts at Neal and Wallace and all the grants we just received?
Some of it, well, depending on approval of design for Phase 3 and 4, which is Railroad Avenue and the traffic circles at Wallace, Nealon, and Shelton Springs Road, and also at 13th. and Wallace Nealon. It budgeted right now is about $340,000 for the design of the traffic circles combined, and then about another $140,000, if my memory serves me right, for design of Railroad Avenue. And then you'll need a fairly significant chunk of that to complete Railroad Avenue also.
Deputy Mayor?
I was just going to note that in the kind of report card that we have here, this is really helpful. The gravel sections are not included in the total numbers, and if you add those in, it actually kind of skews that picture. So adding those columns in, a little over 9% of our road sections are gravel roads still. And so those, that first column that shows the total number of sections does not include the gravel sections. Is that correct?
That is correct, and funding does not, that total funding amount does not address the gravel roads, and for the simple fact that gravel roads are very easy and very low cost for us to maintain. That is the reason that we didn't include them. We didn't have in Street Saver total cost. It's tough to get an accurate cost on gravel roads. Some of them are gray rock, which we can pave over. Most of them, if not a good majority of them, are black rock. They would need to be over excavated. We would need to bring in subgrade material and actually build a road. It's a pretty big undertaking to do those gravel roads, but yes, we did not address gravel roads within that. We identified them, but we did not address them.
So we good with bringing this back?
Pardon me, Mr. Mayor. I just received a public comment card on this item.
Okay. Yeah,
Mike Olson.
okay.
I didn't expect to speak, but it seems how this is the topic. Mike Olson. I just want to bring up the idea that reminds you of that the TBD has a shelf life. It expires in 10 years from the inception, so you're in year 4 now. And you're talking 20-year plans and stuff. Don't get too hooked on that money, because I think that this year we're going to be asked to raise sales tax again for public safety. And so you're looking at up, at the end of this TBD, going back to the people again and saying, do you want to reinstate this? So I agree that, you guys have a hard job to figure this out, but, keep in mind that this isn't a never-ending pot of money, and that you need to be very wise, and I appreciate what you guys are doing with, the forethought of this. But it was sold to the people, specifically residential, in mind, that they wanted to see residential streets taken care of. And I know that the main corridor is very important for commerce, but I think if you're going to sell this to the people again, you need to keep that in mind, that you got to take care of the residential streets too. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Any other discussion for tonight on this? Okay. Another item in a future meeting, is that a good enough answer for tonight?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, our next item is, City Manager Jeff Knighton has information to share about an interlocal agreement with the Mason Transit Authority.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of council. The Mason Transit Authority did approach the city about the park and ride at the informal lot today on State Route 3, close to downtown. We did present this to council at a meeting 2 weeks ago, a couple weeks ago. There have been no changes at all in the agreement, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about the agreement that you might have.
Okay, any questions prior to the motion? Okay, do we have a motion?
I move to approve the interlocal agreement with Mason Transit and authorize the city manager to sign the agreement.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the interlocal agreement with Mason Transit and authorize the city manager to sign the agreement. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we're back to Craig to give us information about Access Shelton Phase 3 and 4.
So as we just mentioned here just a second ago, the design work for Phase 3 and 4. Phase 4, first the Railroad Avenue project that did receive grant funding of a total of $760,000, leveraging some of that TBD or transportation funds as match funding to get Railroad Avenue done or a full project completed with new roadway, sidewalks, illumination, landscaping from 7th to the city limits at this point is what we're planning on. Continued, like I said, continued discussions with Mason County on a partnership to go to 101. But right now, with our section, with grant funding, the TIB funds, were allowed $34,200 to go towards design of that grant funding. And that leaves about $140,000 to transportation funds from the city to complete that design. And then for phase 3, the traffic circles at Wallace, Neeland, and Shelton Springs Road and 13th. Total budget right now is $348,000. I will point out, we did have a little bit left over from the 10% design, about $10,000 left over from the 10% design that will drive this down just a touch. We had $340,000 budgeted. It came in at $348,000. So actually the total will be $338,000, just a couple thousand under what was actually budgeted from the savings from last year with the 10% design that was left over. Be happy to answer any questions you might have about the design work.
Okay, questions, comments for Craig? These will be the final designs, correct?
This will take us through 100%, correct?
And how long are those good for? Do they have a shelf life, I guess?
They
is
do,
what I'm asking.
absolutely. And Railroad Avenue being partially funded already, we would hope to move forward with that project fairly soon. Obviously, the traffic circles are a little more in limbo. We've got some state direct appropriation funding at $650,000 to go towards that project. We're going to be putting in a fairly significant Transportation Improvement Board grant, but pending award of that grant would really drive whether you would move forward with this. You really wouldn't want to move forward with one of these traffic circles without having the other one. They're just spaced too closely together, and traffic flow would not work very well through those two intersections. So, Mayor pointing out shelf life, these do have a fairly significant shelf life, and obviously if we don't get TIB funding this year, we would go back after likely some legislative money and then likely another bite at it from TBD funds next year. So we would not want to move forward with this project unless we had some additional funding. So pending other funding really would drive the construction of these. But a fairly significant shelf life on these designs.
Significant, meaning 3 to 4 years, probably?
I wouldn't think you'd want to go more than 5 to 6 years out of a shelf life, but keep our fingers crossed that we can get funding. We've got a significant amount already towards these, and we've had the TIB engineers out on those project locations, and they did identify a very good and viable project at the four-way stop, not necessarily at the Shelton Springs Road that's already signalized. That's why we went after some state money for that intersection to kind of bridge that gap, because they basically told us that the signalized intersection would likely not be funded. We have been working with Steve Gorchester, our consultant, who used to be the director at TIB. He's got a lot of great insight. We had him in about a month ago, and he is helping us develop the grant application. And we are right now pondering whether we couple those two together and submit them with the legislative money that we did receive as match funding, and also a significant portion of city money going towards match, or whether we just ask for one at the four-way stop and in hopes to get just that one. So we're looking at scoring criteria and how that would actually score, whether we couple them together or one as an individual standalone project. So.
Thanks, Craig.
Yes, you're welcome.
Other questions for Craig? Okay, do we have a motion?
I move to approve SJC Alliance and Gray and Osborne Incorporated to proceed with full design of Access Shelton Phases 3 and 4 by authorizing the mayor to sign both supplemental agreements to the current contracts.
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second to approve SCJ Alliance and Gray and Osborne, Inc. to proceed with full design of Access Shelton Phases 3 and 4 by authorizing me to sign both supplemental agreements to the current contracts. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, next item on the action agenda is amendment to the Department of Ecology's remedial action grant for the C Street landfill. Craig will share some details. I believe.
You've got a public comment on this one?
Oh, thank you. Public comment.
Patricia Vandehey.
Yeah, come on up, Patricia.
Patricia Vandehey, and I live in Fawn Lake. I was wondering why this seems to keep going on forever. It has a perpetual life. There actually was an agreed order on this, and the date isn't on it, but I assume it was close to the one that was also issued by the Department of Ecology with Rainier about Goose Lake in that area, and that was 2001. There's been any number of studies done on this. The agreed order is in depth. I don't think there's any question as to how much the contamination that there is, but it doesn't seem, nothing ever seems to get done about it. The finding of facts on this, it's severely contaminated. There has been so much just dumped in there over the years. And something particularly bad with dioxin, and not just any dioxin, but the most toxic form, 2378 TCDD. It's actually what was one of the chemicals that was used in Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. And they have readings of that in the landfill of 0.17 parts per billion, which comes out to, what is it, 0.17 thousand per trillion. The maximum contaminant level for that chemical in soil is 3.1 parts per trillion. 3.1 parts per trillion. I don't even know how you can even measure something like that. But we've managed to put a great deal more than that in there, and nothing seems to be done. And I'm just wondering why. Why can't we seem to get that finished? And you had, I guess, a lawsuit against you too, from a group trying to see what's going to happen. And it just keeps going on and on and on. So that's my question. When's something going to be done?
Thanks, Patricia. We're going to have a report on some progress, so.
So is there going to be something at the commissioners' meeting about what has been done or going to be done?
I think we can check with staff. Tonight, we're considering extending the Department of Ecology grant, I believe, so.
And this is fairly easy to get, this agreed order. I would, advise to read it,
Okay.
all of you, so you'd be aware of what's going on up here.
Thank you. Okay, great.
So, Mayor, thank you. Council members, just asking for authorization to extend the expiration date of the additional grant funding that we received several months ago. It's a substantial amount of money to move forward with not only the investigation, the remedial investigation, but also the construction phase and the design of the actual closeout of the C Street landfill. We'll give you just a very quick update. We are required to bring you back an update of any activity the first meeting in June. So we will be doing that. That will give you an idea of where we're at. We're very close with Aspect Consultants right now of getting to a point to submit to the Department of Ecology for authorization for design of construction for the cleanup. So significant milestone that we are getting very close to presenting to Department of Ecology for their approval. We have met with them. I've met with them personally a couple of different times, and they have not given us any negative feedback on the proposal as far as moving forward with the design of the construction phase of this that we're hoping to get done by the end of the year. So getting very close to moving forward with that. And like I said, we will be moving or bringing you back a report that is required within the agreed order for the first meeting in June.
Thanks, Craig.
You're welcome.
Questions or comments for Craig? Okay, do we have a motion?
I move to approve the extension of the Department of Ecology Remedial Action Grant for the C Street landfill and authorize the mayor to sign amendment number 4.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second to approve the extension of the Department of Ecology Remedial Action Grant for C Street landfill and authorize me to sign amendment number 4. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. We have our final general public comment period.
And I don't have any comment cards.
All right, thank you, Donna. So we'll turn it over to City Manager Jeff Knighton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. A couple of things I wanted to mention. The Spotlight Shelton event that a few council members mentioned during their updates. Thought went very well. I thought it's a model that we can use going forward, and we do plan to have those twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall. The next one we'll schedule sometime near Halloween for a topic yet to be determined, but we will figure that out coming up and make sure everybody is fully informed and has an opportunity to attend. We also want to move around the community a little bit. So we're not always doing it here. We're offering opportunities for people to participate in different neighborhoods around the city that are close by to their homes. So we can go out to them to talk to them about various issues. Second item I had was the community cleanup event that we also talked about. We have reached out to our partners in that, Mason County Garbage and with the Shelton School District to help us with locations for the pickup. Both have been very receptive and are open to helping us with that program. So we'll look forward to continuing partnerships with them as the years go forward. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Jeff. Questions for Jeff tonight? Councilmember Crunks?
This is not a criticism, but it's just a possible suggestion. I do think if we're going to do these 2 times a year, the experience where we get the public to show up, I think we need to even reach out a little bit farther with the advertising it a month or 2 ahead. This was our first one. And I just think the turnout probably could have been double or triple had enough people, citizens, probably been aware of it. And like we know of this stuff because we get memos and stuff. But I think possibly one outlet might be working in coordination with the Chamber of Commerce, for example, to get it, make sure it comes in their newsletter. Let remember that we're going to do this. Possibly some other media outlets or something, maybe the newspaper would donate a 1/4-page ad or something to advertise, that this is coming up in 2 weeks' time or something. I think it's important that you get the feedback from the community, and I just think it was great. I think that if we're going to do them is on a regular, 2 times a year, getting that word out and getting the buzz on it a month or 2 ahead of time, however we might do that. I don't know, I'm not a real marketing guy, but I think that, having a little, improvement on the marketing thing, because I thought it was a great event.
Yep, we'll always take opportunities to learn to do something better.
Anything else for Jeff? Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, new items for discussion tonight? Hearing none, our next meeting is May 21st, 6 PM. We're adjourned.